In the summer and autumn of 2022, Ukraine sent the Russian invaders reeling with its stunningly successful counteroffensives in the Kharkiv and Kherson oblasts. Over the course of a few months, Ukrainian soldiers liberated thousands of square kilometers of territory, essentially ended the Russian threat to the city of Kharkiv, and recaptured Kherson on the west bank of the Dnieper River, which was the only regional capital that Russia had captured after invading in February. With such victories behind it, Ukraine's Western allies eagerly anticipated the country's 2023 counteroffensive. Zaporizhzhia Oblast stood out as the likeliest axis of advance. A successful campaign there would break Russia's encirclement of the Sea of Azov and cut the land bridge to Crimea, trapping a sizable amount of the Russian forces behind Ukraine's lines, while preventing the illegally annexed peninsula from resupplying the rest of the Russian army overland. But unfortunately, the offensive has not gone as well as those seen in 2022. Russia clearly adapted to Ukraine's success from the earlier campaigns. However, Ukraine has adapted to Russia's new methods of conducting warfare too. How has each of the two sides adapted in the 2023 campaign? Let's take a look. As Russia ground to a halt around Bakhmut after it finally captured the city for the price of tens of thousands of casualties, Ukraine was preparing for its offensive into Zaporizhzhia. The Russians were preparing for it too, and constructed 3 lines of fortifications and trenches that proved to be the strongest seen in Europe since World War I. Russia also learned its lessons from the disasters it saw in 2022. It moved its command and control centers and other important assets further back from the front line to prevent HIMARS attacks. Russia was also paying attention to the news. It learned that Ukraine would be getting advanced Western main battle tanks like the German Leopard, British Challenger, and American Abrams. Knowing this, Russia assembled and trained special groups of tank hunters to destroy them. These tank hunters came armed with reconnaissance drones to spot the tanks. To kill them, at least some of the Russians would be armed with the 9M133 Kornet, which was introduced into the Russian military in 1998 and has an effective range of between 8 and 10 kilometers. In early September 2023, footage spread of a British Challenger tank destroyed as part of fighting around the village of Robotyne. The Kornet was the weapon responsible for this destruction. The Kornet fires a payload with a 10-pound warhead that can penetrate over 100 centimeters of armor from kilometers away. Ukraine also lost 6 Leopard tanks in the last days of October, on top of 6 destroyed earlier in the fighting. That number doesn't seem big at first glance, but only 71 of the Leopard tanks came into Ukraine. This means that about a fifth of the Ukrainian Leopards have been knocked out of commission. Russia has used a combination of mines, drones, and Kornet attacks to take out the Leopards. In an example of such tactics in action, 2 Leopards were struck near Olyansk, on the border between the Kharkiv and Luhansk oblasts. After a drone spotted the tanks, a nearby Kornet team fired. Germany has pledged to donate 14 more Leopards in 2024. Ukraine will need them. According to the Oryx blog, Ukraine has suffered 688 total tank losses throughout the war. Of these, 10 Leopard 2A4s have been destroyed or damaged. Another 10 Leopard 2A6 tanks have been destroyed, damaged, or abandoned. 3 Stridsvagn 122 tanks, a Swedish variant of the Leopard, have been abandoned after damage. 1 Challenger tank has been destroyed. Russia's preparation for the Western tanks meant that they were not as effective as hoped. Since Ukraine launched its counteroffensive in the summer, Russia has also used the seasonal vegetation to its advantage, concealing tanks and anti-tank units and ambushing Ukrainian forces. However, Ukraine also understood that its new Western tanks would become targets. To counter the tactics they expected Russia to use, the Ukrainians kept their enemy guessing about where and when they would concentrate their new tanks. This in turn prevented Russia's tank hunters from concentrating as much as they could have. Ukraine lost relatively few of its Western-supplied tanks in the early months of the offensive. The heavier losses came at a time when Ukraine breached 2 of the 3 Russian defense lines in Zaporizhzhia. The Russian minefields have proven a serious obstacle to Ukrainian forces in Zaporizhzhia. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Ukraine is now the most heavily mined country in the world, and the minefields have gotten deeper since the start of the year. Russian minefields went from 120 to 500 meters deep. Once Ukraine started its offensive, Russia realized that its minefields were too shallow to deal with Western-supplied anti-mine equipment, like the M58 Miklik. The Miklik entered service with the United States Army and Marine Corps in 1988. It works by propelling a line charge that can clear ground in a lane of 100 meters long by 8 wide, allowing room for tanks to advance. The Miklik works against both single-pulse and pressure-fused mines. When the Russians saw the Ukrainians clearing their shallower minefields with the Miklik, they deepened them. This has come at a cost for the Russians, however, as it required them to break mines out of storage and deplete their stockpiles. Newer minefields are not as formidable. Additionally, Russia has lacked anti-vehicle landmines, and the mines it has at its disposal have not proven particularly effective against Western vehicles, which are manufactured to be resistant to them. However, Russia adapted to this reality by stacking landmines together or pairing them with improvised explosive devices. Although this tactic has helped to stall Ukraine's advance, it's also accelerated the depletion of Russia's stockpile of landmines. Now, with Ukrainian units moving past the first 2 lines of Russian defenses, it may have been a tactic that backfired for the long haul. Both sides have adapted the way they use artillery throughout this campaign. Ukrainian gunners have often waited for their Russian enemies to fire first. While this has deprived Ukraine's frontline units of fire support, it's also given Ukrainian gunners the chance to fire back at the Russian artillery. Using Western-supplied counter-battery radars, Ukrainian gunners were able to land precision shots on the Russian batteries, depriving enemy infantry and armor units of artillery support. Russia's army is primarily an artillery one, and the damage to its artillery units opened new opportunities for Ukraine to advance, as the Russian positions became weakened thanks to the lack of such artillery. One of Russia's early adaptations to slow Ukrainian advances was to set fixed positions that can deliver artillery fire into its own trenches. Presumably, this would come only after friendly forces had retreated from those positions, but given that incompetence has proven a calling card in the Russian way of war, it's difficult to know for certain. Russian casualties have been heavier in the Zaporizhzhia campaign than Ukrainian casualties have, which is pretty remarkable considering that Russia has been the defender there and had the benefit of its extensive fortifications. It also shows the effectiveness of the Western equipment Ukraine has been receiving, since the armored vehicles are specifically designed to prevent personnel losses. As Ukraine started to make more headwinds in late September around Robotyne and Verbov, Russian casualties spiked further. If Russia were to prioritize firing into its own trenches at specific points from fixed places to slow the advancing Ukrainians down, it would be accurate with the broader picture of how it has needed to adapt its artillery doctrine. However, the Russians' tactic of firing into their own trenches did not last for long. As we mentioned, Ukrainian forces adapted to this by holding their artillery units in reserve and waiting until the Russian firepower was unleashed. The Western-supplied counter-battery radars and precision strikes took a toll on the fixed Russian guns. The Ukrainian forces proved so effective at this tactics that complaints on Russian social media about it began to spread. One of Russia's generals in Zaporizhzhia, Ivan Popov, was fired after complaining in public about the effectiveness of Ukraine's counter-battery fire. In a leaked audio recording, Popov alleged that Valery Gerasimov, Russia's chief of the general staff, fainted after hearing the unvarnished truth. In a message to an unidentified subordinate, Popov said, "I f***ed Gerasimov up so bad that the bastard fainted. It was a straightforward conversation." This was hardly the first time that Gerasimov faced discontent from his subordinates. He was a frequent target of the Wagner Group's leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who mutinied and demanded his removal at the end of June. Prigozhin was killed in a convenient plane accident on August 23rd, but it seems the criticism of Russia's top general has survived the infamous Wagner man's death. Now, instead of shelling their trenches, Russian forces have taken to using demolition charges to blow them up when Ukrainian forces are advancing through them. Although this has not inflicted casualties as heavy as the usage of artillery would, it has nevertheless slowed the Ukrainians down and denied them the use of strong defensive positions. Both sides have adapted their use of artillery to deal with a shortage of ammunition. The shortage has meant that Russia has been less able to use the mass World War II-style artillery barrages it otherwise prefers. Russia has reached rates of firing 30,000 shells per day in Ukraine and peaked at a rate of 60,000. But that has proven an unsustainable level of ammunition depletion. Putin's meeting with Kim Jong-un in September made waves as the North Korean dictator agreed to supply his counterpart with the artillery shells he has badly needed. South Korea's National Intelligence Service estimates that the North Koreans have already sent 1 million shells to Russia in 10 separate shipments. Further, the North Koreans are making more of them. According to Yoo Sang-bum, A member of South Korea's Parliamentary Intelligence Committee, the North's factories are running at maximum capacity to help supply Russia's demand for ammunition. Even with the help, the high ammunition demands of the war have forced Russia to adapt and try to be more precise with its firepower in order to preserve ammunition and keep its weapons in working order. The high rate of artillery fire not only depletes ammunition, but overheats the guns and makes it easier to be targeted by counter-battery fire. Britain's Royal United Services RUSI think tank reported in September that Russia's gunners have attempted to maximize the accuracy of their weapons with reduced ammunition expenditure rather than resorting to saturation fire. Russia continues to rely on imprecise MLRS systems and 120mm mortars, but it has also grown more sophisticated. For example, it has prioritized the manufacture of Krasnopol 152mm laser-guided artillery shells. Russia has used these shells in conjunction with drone surveillance to get better coordinates for its artillery fire. These adaptations have created a more effective Russian artillery force that has helped to slow Ukraine's counteroffensive in Zaporizhia. Russia has also made progress on its communications effectiveness. Russian signal security has proven poor throughout the war, which made its plans easy to discover and its important infrastructure easy to target with precision HIMARS strikes. The Russians were often forced to use civilian systems to communicate. Now, however, the Russian military is relying more on app-based services to access and encode data. The new systems can provide a 3G connection to multiple devices, and although the experts at RUSI doubt the security of this approach, they admit that it reduces the communications burden on Russian forces, allowing them to more easily systematize their methods and improve their fire coordination. The new communication systems and Russia's growing usage of drones in number and diversity to coordinate with the Krasnopol systems were particularly concerning to the staff at RUSI. The Ukrainian forces have experienced the same problem of shell depletion and artillery barrel overheating. Even though they typically fire far fewer shells than their Russian enemies, Ukraine has 17 different artillery systems in operation, and even though it is well supplied by its Western allies, it cannot expect replacement barrels for all of these weapons if overheating occurs. As a result, Ukraine typically only fires its guns for 2 to 15-minute sessions. The missions on both sides have not been as grand in 2023 as they were in 2022. Company-level assaults have been the dominant form of combat in this campaign. Ukraine's choice to engage in constant low-level operations across its entire front line, stretching from Kherson in the south and west to the Russian border in the north and east, has necessitated that each individual operation be smaller. Ukraine's Western allies originally opposed this type of organization. They instead wanted to see a more concentrated drive along one or two axes. Nevertheless, the choice is played to Ukraine's strengths, as it does not give the Russians as many opportunities to use their superior air and firepower. It's also prevented the Russians from conducting offensive activities of their own or concentrating to reinforce the already formidable defenses in Zaporizhia. Only in the autumn did Russia resume offensive operations, with its advance towards Avdiivka. Communications and staffing issues have additionally prevented both sides from concentrating as much force as required. As we noted, Russia's communication issues have proven a big problem throughout the war, and Ukraine has had a lack of professional staff officers to coordinate the movements of the huge army it has built since the start of the war. The change in operational tempo has been satisfactory for the Russians, as they shifted to an attrition strategy once it became clear that their army would not prevail in a decisive campaign. This is the traditional Russian way of war, and it's been seen in new ways during the 2023 campaign. For example, Russia will often forward deploy a few tanks. As Ukrainian units get bogged down in minefields or terrain features, the Russian tanks will engage and destroy Ukrainian units before they in turn get knocked out. For example, early in the morning of June 4th, Ukrainian units were traversing ground that had been mined but had been cleared in a width of 6 meters before the advance. 2 tanks and several infantry vehicles moved forward, but slowly, and the ground was boggy. Russian tanks were waiting for them, and at this point unmasked themselves. The Russian tanks were eventually destroyed, but only after inflicting disproportionate casualties on their Ukrainian enemies, which were now fully committed to the breach and could not withdraw easily. Tactics like this take advantage of Russia's biggest asset, sheer numbers. The sacrifice of the tanks was cynical and something that Western officers would avoid doing, but Russia has the world's largest tank force, even though most of these tanks are far from top of the line, Because it has such a vast stockpile of tanks, it can afford to sacrifice them if it means disproportionate casualties on Ukrainian vehicles and personnel that will be harder for its enemy to replace. However, for the Russians, there is also a problem with this strategy. Many of the Western vehicles they have managed to remove from the battlefield were not destroyed outright. Rather, they were damaged and later repaired. Tank kills have increased in recent months, and the Ukrainians have steadily broken through Russian defenses and have been able to move more. But through 2023 as a whole, many Western tanks have only been damaged by mines rather than destroyed by Cornet rounds or Russia's new emphasis on laser-guided artillery. The result is that a lot of the Western tanks that have been damaged have simply been shifted to the rear or even to Poland for repairs. They are then sent back into action. This dynamic plays out not just in armor, but with personnel too. The Western vehicles have protected Ukrainian crews from dying, while Russian soldiers have not had that benefit. Russia's willingness to sacrifice its soldiers is one of the reasons why it has taken more casualties despite being on the defensive. Just as importantly, the survival of Ukrainian soldiers has allowed Kyiv to build an army increasingly composed of veterans with valuable combat experience, while Russia's soldiers continually get put into a meat grinder that kills off troops who have seen combat. This is not as important as Russia maintains a defensive posture within its fortifications, but the lack of experienced combat troops puts its success in significant doubt with regards to other operations. The less than stellar performance in its autumn offensive toward Avdiivka shows that. In the Avdiivka offensive, Russia has so far lost as many vehicles in 3 weeks as Ukraine lost during the entire Battle of Zaporizhia this year. Russia has made progress at Avdiivka and surrounded a pocket of Ukrainian defenders, but at the price of 197 damaged or destroyed vehicles, according to the Institute for the Study of War. Russia suffered 99 vehicle losses between October 9th and 13th in its first assault wave. An additional 94 vehicles were damaged or destroyed between the 14th and 23rd of October. The toll taken on the infantry has proven even worse. Just as in Bakhmut, Russia has sent wave after wave of mostly inexperienced and poorly equipped troops into the teeth of Ukrainian defenses around Avdiivka. On October 25th, Oleksandr Shutpun, a spokesman for Ukrainian southern forces, alleged that Russia suffered 2,500 dead and wounded men in 6 days of fighting. The human wave attacks consist of small infantry units amounting to 30 or 40 men each. Before February 24, 2022, Russia claimed that it was a modern combined arms fighting force, with state-of-the-art equipment and tactics. However, it has prosecuted the war in ways that have proven little different from the way it has fought its conflicts for centuries, where it's called upon its seemingly inexhaustible reserve of manpower to batter the enemy into submission. With this in mind, the war in Ukraine looks less like a modern war and more like Russia's depressing experience in the Winter War in Finland, where it suffered a casualty ratio as high as 10-1. Russia's ruthless strategy and willingness to take more punishment than its enemy may be crude, but poses significant problems for Ukraine. To counter Russia's tactics, Ukraine will need to have a steady stream of well-trained, high-quality veteran troops arriving on the battlefield. NATO's training of Ukrainian troops should have theoretically helped with this. However, the way NATO conducted its training has been the subject of controversy in Ukraine. As the progress of the campaign in Zaporizhia proved much slower than the West hoped for, the Ukrainian military became subject to criticism. For example, a leaked German military document from July revealed that Bundeswehr officers critiqued Ukrainian forces for not implementing NATO training properly and for splitting Western-trained brigades into small units of 10 to 30 soldiers, while attacking enemy positions. Ukrainian units, though, have in turn critiqued NATO, accusing the alliance of training them for the wrong kind of war. American officers in Ukraine have echoed this sentiment, saying that NATO has dusted off its counterinsurgency warfare doctrine and taught it to Ukrainian troops. Ukrainian troops have also complained about a lack of training on drone and mine awareness, explosive ordnance disposal, and combat in defense, which contributed to their getting bogged down in minefields. Other soldiers have said that the training did not last long enough, at times only coming in 3-week intervals. NATO trainers also seem to lack knowledge of the terrain and the necessity of small units to fight through thick tree lines. Finally, NATO trainers have tended to focus too much on individual soldiers' skills and neglect training in units of companies or greater. One of the last but more important reasons Ukraine's offensive has lacked the pace of last year's campaigns is that Russian forces have learned to retreat in a more orderly way. In Kharkiv and Kherson, Russian units retreated in routes, amplifying casualties and the territory liberated. In Zaporizhia, retreats have been orderly, leaving fewer opportunities for Ukraine to exploit. With winter fast approaching, it appears that major action will take a lull for the time being, but with Western fighter jets like the F-16 set to arrive, keep on the lookout for newer adaptations as the war drags on into a third year. But what adaptations do you think have proven important to the pace of the Zaporizhia campaign? What changes have both sides made and why do they matter? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Also, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more military analysis from military experts.